Trump wins 2024, and almost immediately, something big happens. Major economies start dumping US debt. The UK slashes its holdings by $44 billion. Japan trims $27 billion, and Saudi Arabia follows suit. In total, 16 of the world's top holders of US Treasuries have pulled back. Is this just a market adjustment, or is it the start of something bigger? Could Trump's policies be fueling fears of inflation, trade wars, and rising debt? More importantly, what does this mean for you? Stay tuned, because the ripple effects of this sell-off could shake the entire global financial system. Before we start, please subscribe to our channel so we can continue breaking down global news for you. Now let's dive in. The moment Trump secured his 2024 re-election, global investors made their move, dumping billions in US Treasuries. Out of the 20 major economies that typically invest in US debt, 16 pulled back. The sell-off wasn't just a minor adjustment, it was a signal. The UK led the exodus, cutting its US Treasury holdings by $44.1 billion, marking one of the most significant reductions in years. Japan followed with a $27.3 billion sell-off, likely as part of its strategy to stabilize the yen. Saudi Arabia trimmed its holdings by $15.1 billion, aligning with its growing economic ties with China. Meanwhile, China reduced its exposure by $9.6 billion, continuing its long-term strategy of diversifying away from US financial dominance. Other countries joined in, with India selling off $14.9 billion, Switzerland cutting $9.7 billion, and Norway reducing its holdings by $9 billion. This wasn't just random market activity. It was a clear shift away from US debt. When foreign investors sell off treasuries, the effects ripple through the economy. One of the biggest consequences is higher borrowing costs. As demand for US government bonds falls, their prices drop, causing yields, essentially interest rates, to rise. This translates to higher mortgage rates for homeowners, more expensive loans for businesses, and increased costs for the US government to borrow money. Treasury yields have already started climbing, reflecting investor concerns about inflation and the growing national debt. With Trump's plans to push for tax cuts and increased government spending, many fear the US deficit will balloon, making treasuries even less attractive. The big question now is whether this is just a temporary reaction or the beginning of a long-term shift away from US dollar dominance. If foreign investors continue reducing their reliance on US debt, the financial landscape could change dramatically, with lasting consequences for global markets. The sell-off wasn't just a market blip, it signaled something deeper. When 16 of the world's largest holders of US Treasuries cut their investments, it wasn't by accident. Nations are shifting their financial strategies for a reason, and several key factors are driving this move. One of the biggest concerns is Trump's economic policies. His administration has been vocal about imposing higher tariffs, tightening trade restrictions, and taking a more aggressive stance on sanctions. Global investors worry that these policies could lead to a more volatile economic environment, prompting them to reduce their exposure to US debt. If trade wars escalate, the dollar's dominance in global finance could weaken, making treasuries less attractive. Beyond short-term concerns, de-dollarization efforts are gaining momentum. Countries like China and Russia have been actively reducing their reliance on the US dollar. Instead of holding large amounts of US debt, they are conducting trade in local currencies, investing in gold, and developing alternative payment systems to bypass the Western-controlled financial network. In December 2024, China's holdings of US Treasuries fell to $759 billion, the lowest since 2009, as Beijing continued shifting toward a more diversified reserve strategy. Another critical reason behind the sell-off is currency intervention. Some countries adjust their foreign reserves to stabilize their currencies during market fluctuations. Japan, for example, reduced its US Treasury holdings from $1.08 trillion in November 2024 to $1.06 trillion in December, likely part of its strategy to strengthen the yen. By selling treasuries and using the proceeds to buy yen, Japan aims to prevent excessive depreciation. Similarly, Saudi Arabia adjusts its reserves based on oil price fluctuations. When oil revenues decline, the kingdom often reduces its U.S. Treasury holdings to support domestic financial stability. From mid-2024, Saudi Arabia cut its holdings from $142 billion to $137 billion, aligning with shifts in global oil demand and energy market uncertainty. While major sell-offs grab attention, U.S. Treasuries remain a safe haven for many investors due to their liquidity and stability. Even as some nations reduce holdings, domestic investors and institutions often step in. Moreover, not all sales signal lost confidence. Japan sells to stabilize the yen. Saudi Arabia adjusts reserves based on oil prices. The real question is whether this trend will persist and how U.S. policies will shape the future of global finance. History shows that no currency stays on top forever. Before the dollar, the British pound sterling was the world's primary reserve currency, thanks to the reach of the British Empire. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, nearly 60% of global trade was conducted in pounds, and central banks worldwide held it as their preferred reserve asset. World War I and World War II dramatically altered this landscape. Britain emerged heavily indebted and saw its economic strength wane, while the United States grew into the largest global creditor and trade hub. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement elevated the U.S. dollar to the status of global standard, pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, a system that provided a measure of stability for decades. But by the late 1960s, cracks began to appear. The U.S. was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and domestic programs, leading to inflation and concerns about its gold reserves. Foreign governments, especially France, started redeeming their dollars for gold, draining U.S. reserves. In response, President Richard Nixon made a historic move in 1971, severing the dollar's link to gold, a decision now known as the Nixon shock. This ended the Bretton Woods system and launched the era of floating exchange rates, where currency values fluctuate based on market forces. Why does this history matter? Because it shows that global reserve currencies are not permanent. Wars, economic crises, and shifting power dynamics determine which currency dominates. The shift from the pound to the dollar was gradual, but once confidence in a currency weakens, change can happen faster than expected. Is the dollar now facing the same fate? The US dollar still dominates global finance, but its grip is being tested. Major holders of US Treasuries, like China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, are quietly reducing their investments. This raises a critical question. How long can the dollar maintain its stronghold? One immediate consequence? Rising US interest rates. When key investors offload treasuries, bond prices drop and yields climb. That means borrowing costs surge, not just for the government, but for businesses, homeowners, and consumers. Mortgage rates spike, loans become pricier, and economic pressure builds across the board. The U.S. already faces a staggering national debt of over $36 trillion. And with Trump's tax cuts and increased government spending already in motion, that debt could grow even faster. And if foreign investors continue pulling back, the U.S. may be forced to offer even higher interest rates to lure buyers, intensifying pressure on an economy already grappling with inflation and Federal Reserve tightening. Beyond the U.S., the global financial system is adjusting to this shift. China and Russia have been actively promoting de-dollarization, increasing trade in local currencies instead of the dollar. In 2024, over 90% of trade between China and Russia was settled in yuan and rubles, reducing their need for dollar reserves. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are also discussing a new reserve currency, which could eventually challenge the dollar's role in global finance. Meanwhile, central banks worldwide are stockpiling gold as a hedge against dollar dependence. For the third consecutive year, global central banks purchased over 1,000 tons of gold, the highest level in over 50 years. This signals a clear intent to diversify reserves and reduce reliance on the U.S. financial system. The trend is clear. nations are quietly shifting their strategies, questioning whether the US dollar will remain the unshakable pillar of global finance. While the greenback still dominates, the foundations of its supremacy are being tested. The real question now is, how much longer can it hold? As countries move away from treasuries, they are also rethinking how they conduct global transactions. This has led to a rise in digital currencies, which could further accelerate de-dollarization. New financial technologies could accelerate the rebalancing of global reserves, challenging traditional banking systems and reshaping how money moves across borders. One of the biggest developments is the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. China is leading the charge with the ECNY, digital yuan, which is already in circulation for domestic use and international trade experiments. Unlike traditional currencies, the ECNY operates outside the Western banking system, allowing China to bypass US-controlled financial networks like SWIFT. Other nations, including India, Russia, and members of the European Union, are actively exploring their own CBDCs to reduce reliance on the dollar in cross-border transactions. If these digital currencies gain traction, they could further weaken the dollar's hold on global trade. At the same time, stablecoins, cryptocurrencies pegged to fiat currencies, have introduced an unexpected dynamic. Despite growing skepticism toward the dollar, stablecoins like USDT, Tether, and USDC continue to reinforce its role in digital finance. Globally, over $226 billion in stablecoins is in circulation, with 63% tied to the US dollar. This paradox suggests that while traditional finance is shifting, digital assets still heavily depend on the greenback. For now. Meanwhile, the composition of global reserves is quietly changing. In the early 2000s, the US dollar accounted for nearly 70% of global foreign exchange reserves. That number has now slipped to around 58% as central banks diversify their holdings. Gold purchases hit a 50-year high in 2023 and 2024, and currencies like the euro and Chinese renminbi are gaining ground. Technology is accelerating financial transformation. Whether through CBDCs, blockchain-based payments, or a mix of alternative assets, the world is gradually moving toward a more multipolar financial system. The global economy is shifting, and the rules of money are changing. As central banks rethink reserves and digital currencies expand, investors and consumers alike must adapt to new financial realities. For individuals, this could mean higher interest rates on loans and mortgages, increased currency volatility, and new forms of digital transactions. The traditional banking system may evolve, with central bank digital currencies and alternative payment systems reshaping how people save, spend, and transfer money. Investors, on the other hand, may need to diversify beyond traditional assets, considering gold, foreign currencies, and emerging digital finance options. Those who stay informed and flexible will be best positioned to thrive in an increasingly complex multipolar world. Nations are diversifying reserves, reducing treasury holdings, and exploring alternatives like gold and digital currencies. While the US dollar remains dominant, history has shown that no reserve currency lasts forever. Is this just another market shift, or the foundation of a new global financial order? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit the like button and subscribe for more insights. See you next time.